Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at the major astrological transits of the month of November. This is a broad overview. Of course, as the month goes on, what we tend to do on my channel is look at each of the individual transits and break them down on an archetypal level, meditate and reflect on them as we go. Maybe even do horoscopes on some of them, especially like earlier this week we did Mars retrograde, which was at the very end of October. We'll be doing something similar for the eclipse coming up. So there'll be maybe a few opportunities for horoscopes as the month goes on. I'm also joined today by my friend and colleague, Alex Amorosi, who you guys have met a few times before. Last month, I was dealing with a cold. I'm still on and off been dealing with a cold. So Saturn's opposing my ascendant ruler, so that's been fun. And so he wasn't on last month, but we intended to, and then we just didn't get around to it. So he's back this month. And we're going to be taking a look at the astrology together. Before I get into it, though, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We're almost to 50,000 subscribers. I can't believe it. So help us get there with this last push and put a fun idea into the chat box or the comment section. What should we do when we reach 50,000 subscribers? I feel like we should do something, I don't know, something fun. People have got the most popular idea seems to be a live dance party, which I'm just not the like dance on camera in front of nobody kind of person. So, like, even though there's people out there, like can't picture myself doing it. So you guys got to come up with something else. That one's not going to work for me. Maybe a giveaway. I don't know. I could come on with a cake that says 50K on it and pretend to feed you all pieces. Okay, well, anyway, I really appreciate you guys helping the channel to grow. You can find a transcript of any of my daily talks on the website, nightlightastrology.com. Also, this week, it's the last week that you can register for my upcoming program, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. It is a one-year course in ancient Hellenistic astrology, and you can learn more about it on my website, which is nightlightastrology.com. If you go to the courses page and click on the first year course at the top, scroll down to learn more about it. Starts November 12th, so it is coming up. It is not too late to join, but because it's rather last minute and we're getting a lot of applications in this last week, do so right away. Don't wait any longer. Just do it now, because this is really, it's easy. It's much easier for us to get you plugged in and get you all the information that you need to know, which takes a minute. So make sure you sign up. Anyway, there's 30 classes on the year. There's a bunch of guest teachers that come in outside of those 30 classes that I lead. It's all recorded if you can't make it live, so you can take it at your own pace. We have a tutoring staff that's there for you, both with breakout study sessions and a discussion forum, and they do a lot of help to make sure that you're integrating the material as we go. At the bottom of the page, you'll find out how to sign up. You can use the early bird payment. That is not good after the beginning of class. So once November 12th hits, that cannot be used anymore. We also have a payment plan. You can spread out the tuition over 12 months, or we have need-based tuition. We still have a few spots available, not many. So make sure if you're going to use need-based tuition, which is there for anyone who could use a little help because you're on a fixed budget, or you're experiencing some kind of hardship, or you need to work, you want to study astrology, but you need to make it work within a restrained budget. We get that. So use that. We still have a few spots left. All right. Well, thank you guys for letting me promote the program. And with all of that being said, I'm ready to dive into the astrology of November. And in order to do so, I'm going to call my buddy Alex on. Hey, Alex.
Hey, no live dance party? Come on.
I know, right?
Hear me out. Just dress up like Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah. That's right.
Lights in your office.
Yeah. People will be like, he's my astrologer. He is not my dance instructor. That'll be the big takeaway.
I love that. That's the number one. That's amazing.
Yeah. Like literally, I've asked like so many days in a row, and there's at least like 20 people being like, live dance party. I don't get it. But it's a great idea, I guess. Although if I think about it, it's probably like on Instagram, I look and I see there's a lot of people that like to just video themselves, like just like oily hips, just like dancing, going for it. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm not that in touch with myself, I guess.
My little cousin showed me on TikTok. It's a whole thing. Like people just doing their own dance and then like getting 4 million views or something. It's insane.
Well, we have like my wife's cousin has a wedding coming up, and like if there's an actual dance happening, like I love to dance, so I'm not like averse to it. I just have a hard time like just dancing online, I guess.
Yeah, in front of a camera when no one else is there.
Yeah. Well, anyway, enough about dance parties and all of that. We are about to get into the astrology of November. People who don't know Alex is an astrologer, yoga teacher, energy healer. You can find him on Instagram, Alex Amorosi Healing. If you want to connect with him for a reading, get on his client schedule, stuff like that. Alex, we have a lot in common just because we both have a lot of love for astrology and also come from the yoga world. So it's been really natural and fun to work together. We're going to be looking at all of the transits and just kind of looking at, well, I should say all of them. I write down all of them, and then as I'm going along, I usually pull out what I think are going to be the biggest and most significant transits of the month, and then Alex and I will rap about them for a little bit. So that is our agenda. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's go. So here we are, and we're going to start on November 5th, actually. And I think this is, early on in the month, there's a few Venus transits that are pretty big. Let's go to the 5th here, and we'll see if the gigantic circle pen pops out or not. I don't know. We'll see what my luck is like. Okay, so here, oh, nope, normal size. And there's Venus opposing Uranus.
Normal arrow too, Adam. Come on.
I know I know. You wouldn't believe it, like how many times, like I think it happened for the first time when you and I were doing a video, but then since then it's become a total thing, like just the ghost in the machine of the big arrow that shows up. Yeah. So here's Venus between the 5th of November and the 7th of November. On the 5th, Venus opposes Uranus, and on the 7th, it squares Saturn. So it's effectively Venus activating the Saturn-Uranus square. My thought about this is, it's not right away, but the fact that this is happening and then boom, on the 8th, we have a lunar eclipse in Taurus, Venus's sign. So I'll just fast forward this just a little bit more so that everyone can see that. And let me... So... that's, to me, it's a really powerful and very Venusian flavored sequence of events. The lunar eclipse is coming through in Taurus in a conjunction with Uranus. You're going to see it. Obviously, full moon always opposes the sun. And so there's the Uranus, this is a Uranian lunar eclipse after Venus, the ruler of the eclipse, has just passed through the Saturn-Venus square. So I have a few thoughts about this. I kind of want to hear what you have to say first. What do you think? What do you think about this sequence? We're just going to go Venus opposite Uranus, Venus square Saturn, lunar eclipse in Venus's sign. What do you think about that?
Oh my God. This lunar eclipse, and it will be exactly conjunct Uranus, 16 degrees of Taurus. With Venus and Scorpio, I have a couple of thoughts just opposing Uranus, and then we'll get to Saturn. One is that, I think Venus, this may reveal or break open or have the sort of lightning strike of insight into darker ideas around Venus about desire or lust or, even darker art or music or something like that. There's something that Uranus brings to that sort of cracks it open or reveals it, or there may even be also on the other side of that an impulsivity that comes around it, or something that feels like, I have to follow this instinct right now. I think Scorpio can have a very instinctual quality, both Taurus and Scorpio in different ways. So that's why I think, Venus hits that first. She kind of hits, that electrified feeling of Uranus, and then she comes into a real quick reality check.
Yeah.
Where Saturn, Saturn's sitting there like, I always think like in Amadeus, there's that, there's that strong music and this big imposing figure turns around and kind of shames the figure at the bottom of the stairs. Is sort of that can feel like that, which might be a darker interpretation of that. Or it might be Saturn just bringing a little, I think Saturn does bring that voice of reason and, a little bit of stability and something that feels like it gets a little erratic or out of control. It could feel really imposing and a very heavy, responsible voice comes down, or just some kind of healthy discipline that says okay, well, that is something you're getting an insight into. Let's see if we can move with that in a more maybe responsible, disciplined or way that brings about a more long-term desired result. That's what I'd go with that at first about Saturn, at least with those two ideas.
Yeah, that's a great point. The thing that comes to my mind is also, or the I guess the additional point that I want to throw in here is that Venus is, we're coming off from a solar eclipse in the at the end of October, on the 25th of October, that featured Venus coming out of Cazimi and being in Scorpio. Venus is naturally in its exile in Scorpio, which means it's just an archetypal tension that's present when Venus is in Mars's sign.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a more controversial Venus. Well, if I think about that, and then I think about how potent that Venus is around this lunar eclipse in Venus's sign, I think, okay, so been reading this book lately called The Bible as Dream. It's like a Jungian interpretation of the Bible, and it is absolutely fascinating. But one of the distinctions that it makes throughout the text, archetypally speaking, is the difference between some of the feminine characters throughout the biblical stories that are either sort of in support of the heroic narrative, or those that are seen as like temptresses that could take the hero off the hero's path. If the ultimate heroic goal is to become the fully individuated Christ-like individual, right? Like if that's sort of the goal of the Christian read of the Bible. Obviously the Jewish experience of the Bible is going to be a completely different thing. But if you or the Torah, for example, but like you have characters like Ruth and Deborah, who are basically like handmaidens of the Lord. You know, they're like, what I think that's what I was. Is that the thing that was, what's from Lord of the Rings? What help me geek out here with Lord of the Rings? Handmaidens, is that what they were called? Shield maidens.
Shield maidens.
That's what I was thinking of. Shield maidens. They're like shield maidens of the Lord. They're like, they're the feminine that somehow aids and supports the heroic, more masculine narrative, right? And then then there's characters, you know, who are considered to be like, you know, temptresses. For example, Eve is often cast in that light. Or there will be the temptation of the flesh, which is often depicted as something more feminine. Tiamat is conquered, and Tiamat would be like, you know, the sort of primordial feminine chaos or something like that. So there's always, but you always have, so, and then in the story of Jesus, you have Mary the Virgin, you have Mary Magdalene, who is a prostitute. So you get that kind of archetypal virgin whore dichotomy. And I'm not using that word disrespectfully. So but the idea is that there is often a splitting in the anima, in the feminine image. You know, there's like a duality. And is it a real duality or is it a false duality? Whose duality is it? And I think oftentimes, you know, it's a duality that maybe a society or puts on women, for example. Well, you're either pure and avoiding temptation and being in support of the heroic narrative, or you're a total slut who's just degrading anyone and everything, including yourself, into chaos or you know, carnal lust. And it's in these images of the feminine, that dual image of the feminine is so like overblown and so strong. And I see it like, you know, already like in the programming my girls are receiving through movies on TV. You know, the bad girl and the good girl. And the bad girl is always often depicted as someone who's likes to be selfish. You know, like, but, well, is it always bad to be selfish? Is it always bad to, you know, whereas the good girl is often the one who's supporting a guy? You know what I mean? Like, there's stuff like that. So there's all these images, and my point is that I can't help but wonder with Venus in Scorpio, where Venus in Scorpio to me is like complicated around desire and passion and sensual enjoyment, pleasure. It would be very easy because we say, well, you know, Venus is in its exile, to look at that Venus and say, well, that Venus is like a temptress who will get you off track by, you know, making you cheat on your spouse or something. Like just a stereotypical image of Venus like that. I can't help but wonder if some of these dichotomies between like the good girl and the bad girl are ready to be blown up. And I don't mean that just in the lives of women. I mean that as an archetype within everyone's life. If this cycle doesn't have something to do with discarding a false dichotomy, you somehow have to choose between being good or being beautiful, like enjoying the body or somehow, being in service to the transcendent realm of heaven. And there's some kind of false dichotomy there that feels like it's like baked into this eclipse cycle.
First of all, I'm going to read that book because I was just looking at some of that stuff on YouTube last night about the different types of stories. But, I think that there's a friend of mine who does a lot of sexual healing work for queer people, especially queer men, will often talk about this idea of the dichotomy between you're either sexualized or you're intelligent. You're either hot or you're or the nerd, like whatever it is, right. And not realizing like we're much more complex than that. And also that our desires are very complex and they don't always fit into a rigid box. Yeah. They don't always fit into what someone feels comfortable putting their own idea around. And I feel like Venus and Scorpio can kind of be very fearless in that idea of being like, you're not going to put me in a box. Yeah. You're not going to put what my desire is. And that sometimes, and it may be that around this eclipse as well, with Uranus kind of, flashing this open, that it brings to light some of those. This is something I'm coming to understand as a desire of mine. This is something I'm kind of understand as a part of me that I may have exiled out. I think of like internal family systems, the exiled part, right? That I'm bringing back in and owning and bringing back into my heart. That's a really cool way of looking at that. I hadn't considered. Yeah.
It's like the shadow of Venus is, and I think it's very possible, given the opposition to Uranus and the square to Saturn, that there's this internal conflict around some Venusian aspect of our lives: pleasure, sex, desire, beauty, self-image, self-worth, what we're attracted to or repulsed by, these kinds of things. And I think Saturn tends to be the one that has the oughts and shoulds, and is more more about rules, right? Yeah. Uranus tends to be the one that's more about letting go of inhibitions. And so I just wonder if this eclipse cycle to start the month, the 5th, let's roll through it again here on my little notes. So the 5th, Venus opposes Uranus. Let's break free. And it's a complicated breaking free. It's an opposition. So it's like, this is not an easy thing to do, but I have to, and I'm not going to be ashamed of what I love or what I'm attracted to. There's some need to be liberated. And maybe there's a little bit of like calibrating that has to happen. It's sort of like the nerdy kid in the high school movie that, decides to drink at the last day of school, and they get way too drunk, but it's not like you have to worry about them becoming an alcoholic. They just drank for the first time, Right. But maybe you go a little nutty at first, or something. But my point is that there's a complicated sort of, let me just own my pleasure impulse here on some level. And whatever that is, that seems to me like that's the first step. Then the second one is the check from Saturn. Right. Well, is that going to make you other, different, black sheep, cast out, heretic? What does that make you? Or maybe you should check yourself. Maybe you should go back to being safe and, laws, rules, and so forth. Now, on the other hand, if you go, and then finally we get to the lunar eclipse in Taurus, and the lunar eclipse is with an exalted moon and Uranus. And to me, that it goes back to the Venus opposite Uranus transit, and it says, yep, we're doing this. This is happening.
Oh yeah.
Doesn't it feel like that?
It totally feels like that. I mean, I feel like, what's interesting about Taurus, I find with Uranus there, and I sometimes think of Taurus as like, when I was, where Taurus comes in the light cycle of the Northern Hemisphere. When I was growing up, my dad was really into gardening. And so he would always start our plants inside during Taurus season because it's too cold in New England to put them outside, until it's about, later in May. And how the Taurus likes to have this, we think of Taurus as like wanting things to stay the same, very rigid, but that's because it's incubating new life. It's sort of in this place where it's you know, the conditions of like the seedling has to be in the right soil with the right amount of water, with the right amount of light and the right temperature in order that it germinates and becomes new life. That's Taurus's job, so to speak. You know, I think of like Uranus coming in there, and Uranus is like if like my cat got up on the table with all those seedlings, started like knocking them over and like digging them out and like peeing on them. It's just, there's like a more of a chaotic feeling to it. But sometimes there's this sort of feeling of like, where have I been incubating or holding or keeping it the same too much? Where have I been feeling like I've had to keep things in too much of a container? I've had to keep everything a little too safe. And the lunar eclipse, you know, with this sort of a little bit more, you know, this kind of like badass Venus and Scorpio is kind of being like, no, it's time to break free. It's time to break loose. It's time to, you know, the seedling has incubated enough. It has grown. It's okay to be outside now. It's okay to be in the elements and the more unpredictable nature of the outer world, so to speak.
Yeah, that feels right to me as well. The the interesting thing is, we'll go forward here a little bit. You go to November 8th and November 9th, Mercury and the Sun oppose Uranus. So let me move this forward just a little bit. So on the 8th and 9th, and I'll just kind of draw this in so everyone can see it. So the Sun and Mercury, we've got a Mercury Cazimi, first of all. So it's like going through the heart of the Sun after both are just opposing Uranus. This is some ballsy stuff coming through like all in a row with Uranus, like the urge to recreate, to innovate, to take a step forward, to break out of old things, to let go of old things or things that feel confining is super strong. You know, I look at this and the fact that like my own ascendant ruler is in the mix of all of this. And I go, well, I mean, that is precisely what was at work in, for example, my choice to leave the formal commitments to a religious path that I was on. It's not that I'm not spiritual any longer, or that I don't value meditation, or that I don't believe in God or something like that. But for me, anyway, it was just this need to like leave behind something that was feeling more confining than helpful. Now, I'm not saying it is that way for everyone. I'm not trying to say that, because I have a lot of friends who are on that path who probably still watch my channel, or when I still really love. So I'm not suggesting that religion has to be that way for everyone, but that's what I was starting to experience. I will tell you, what's really interesting is I saw a talk from a popular yoga content creator, and I'm forgetting her name now. But anyway, she's like a popular yoga influencer, you know, and she moved back to her home country, and I'm forgetting where it was, like Sweden or something. And she'd been like ultra vegan, and under the same Venus or the same Saturn Uranus dynamic, just recently, she let it be known that she was no longer feeling comfortable with veganism, which I thought was really interesting. Not so much because I have an opinion about whether someone should be vegan or not. I really don't. It's up to every individual to make that choice. But because I thought this is so fitting of needing to leave behind, like breaking out of something, breaking out of a shell. It's sort of like the moment where the, you know, super cliched image, but the butterfly breaking out of a cocoon. It's very Uranus Saturn. You're breaking out of an old structure of your psyche. But this is like doubling down on it, because right after we get this whole sequence with Venus, then we have the Sun and Mercury, and they start to concretize in my mind. Not just Venus helps us break through in my mind really physically. Like the Venus to me is like the Lord of the five senses, the goddess of the five senses, you know, so she's like the ruler of that. The Sun and Mercury coming together feel to me more ideological or intellectual. Like we're starting to understand or have some coherent, not just logic, but understanding about why we're doing what we're doing. Like sometimes you start making changes and you're like, well, this just feels like the right thing to do. I feel it in my body, so I'm doing it. You start doing it and then you go, and I understand why I'm doing it now.
Right. And I think that, you know, like I said, you know, we were talking about too, you know, riffing off of that, there's that instinctual sense nature of Venus and Scorpio, right? And then you get Mercury coming in that brings more of a, well, how am I communicating this? How am I thinking about this? And then the Sun, you know, what are the new ideals that are coming through because of it? What's the new light that I'm shining? What's the, you know, Uranus is interesting. Uranus is, I think of like during a thunderstorm at night, like it's the lightning strike where you see all of a sudden and then it's dark again. It's like this, I can't unsee what I just saw. And then Saturn can, even though these are squares to Saturn, Saturn can bring a little bit more of like the, okay, here's the durable long term around that. You know, here's the possibilities. Here's the this and the that. You know, we were talking about how Saturn tends to be a little bit more this or that. I think Uranus is wonderful for the insight. Uranus doesn't often have a long term plan around it. It's just this is what needs to happen.
Right.
And it's very immediate. And then Saturn could have the effect here. And especially as we get later in the month, we get, you know, Neptune and Jupiter and Pluto involved. But like, you know, that's effective. Okay, how is that going to be actualized?
Right.
Type of, you know,
how does it become, I mean, as much as I don't want to say, well, turn around and concretize things right away again, because we've maybe we've just broken free and now we're going to turn around and like get it tattooed on our arm, you know. And I'm joking around when I said, you know, I'm going to let myself just be open to what comes next in terms of like a spiritual community I might belong to or spiritual commitments I might have, because I'm a guy who I like having spiritual community and praxis and, you know, things that I'm getting into. And I might just be a church hopper the rest of my life, so to speak.
Right.
But who knows? But I said I have to just leave myself open rather than rushing out to do something right away. I think that the shadow of this might be just that. Well, okay, I've broken free. And so now I have to concretize what I've done through some new commitment, you know, some new ideology that I have to put in place in order to justify or further support what Venus just brought through, which was maybe more sensual and intuitive and organic and feminine, you know? And so I think we need to be careful, because I think the sun's approach to these placements is going to be much more about the logos of it all. And you know, well, that could be a good thing. It could also be a, like, just slow your roll, let things, maybe understanding developing is different than defining commitments and ideas too quickly or something.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think you know, it's the idea in Buddhism that I study, of groundlessness, just letting yourself be groundless, letting your feet float, letting, you know, allowing the more feminine aspects, the yin aspects to, you know, receiving and letting things come to you and letting yourself be brought. Because Saturn, you know, the shadow of that absolutely is just what you said. And I would just add to that too, is, you know, getting back to what's familiar, getting back to, oh my God, that feels really scary to be new. Maybe I want to go back to what felt like was the tried and true method. Just my riff on that.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to skip around here a little bit. We have series of very brief trines and sextiles in the middle of the month. I am not probably going to make any videos about those throughout the month, so I want to jump ahead to two transits that are coming right around the middle of the month that I do think are a little bit bigger of a deal. First of all, we have the sun trining Neptune. Mercury will trine Neptune and the sun will trine Neptune. Mercury does so on the 12th, and then the sun does so on the 14th. That encourages me, because it's like, you know, first the sun and Mercury hit Saturn, but then right away they both hit Neptune. And so I feel like I can just feel like almost like it's a template of experience where you go through a change and you're scrambling to understand the change, which has come up from the unconscious. So you're trying to be reasonable about it.
Right.
And initially that's the hit with Saturn, right? That's that Mercury and the sun have. Then they go through the trine with Neptune. They both do from the 12th to the 14th. And I feel like that's an invitation to let our understanding unfold and be more process oriented. Or if we've gotten too concrete too quickly, something will happen that will make it more nebulous and porous, like right away. So there's a little bit of a, like almost like it could be a little manic, you know, like a little back and forth around this time. It's a powerful month.
It is. And, you know, if I were the sun, Mercury, or Venus, I would be very happy to see Neptune approaching in this trine coming up, just being like, you know, because I think that, you know, Neptune provides a little bit also, like everything you said, and just like a little grace of being like, you know what, you're loved unconditionally. Try it out. As long as you're not harming anybody or yourself, you know, you're loved, you're open, you know, you're held in a much bigger, more intuitive space.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's a nice way of putting it. On the 15th, Venus trines Jupiter, who is retrograded back into Pisces. I like that. Very watery. That's a very fertile transit. So in terms of it being romantic, good for like love, camaraderie, friendship, anything that's uplifting, entertaining. For example, I'm going to a concert with a few friends like right around this transit. I'm like, well, that makes total sense. We're going to see a rocker who's very Venus and Scorpio as it's trying Jupiter. Like it'll be a fun night out with friends. Like you get that. It could be romantic if you don't want to get pregnant from a one night stand. I'd be a little careful. Venus in Scorpio with Jupiter and Pisces is like I'm going in with a chemical burn about the way I feel about this person, and I'm coming out like pregnant. Like be careful of that.
Yeah. Yeah, the fertile signs on the two benefics. Yeah,
exactly. Even around that time, I mean, you can even see like the moon is in Cancer too, so it's a super fertile time, like middle of November. Things that we love, things that we're thinking will create growth. There'll be growth around them. So just something to watch out for.
Yeah.
I like it in terms of like things that are growing. When you think about things that are growing and fertile, you can think about things that are just pleasant and enjoyable. But you can also think about things that are like financially, the people that you meet in partnerships that are created in business could be fruitful, even if that it just happens to be that you meet under this period. You got a lot of water in the air, and that makes things grow.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's a nice respite for a lot of these planets from a little bit more jarring oppositions and squares earlier in the month.
Yeah, by the middle of the month, it's like there's this big watery flow compared to earlier in the month where it's all like, it's like explosion, restriction, explosion, restriction, so, it's like, so intense. Well, Venus goes into Sagittarius on the 16th. Why don't you tell us what do you love about Venus and Sagittarius, or what should people watch for when Venus enters Sag?
Oh, it's a lot. I think just a lot hopefulness, fun, expansion. Be merry, so to speak. I'm speaking as the resident Sagittarius here, so I'm speaking with some bias. But I think also like what might feel like I'm wrestling with these coming to terms with these darker exile parts of myself and Scorpio, a little more existential, starts to feel like, and now I'm going to pop the cork and have fun.
Right.
That I think what I've really loved seeing about this month, I think, is such an interesting dichotomy of like, there's just a little bit more intense feeling of the Scorpio oppositions and squares. And then now these planets are moving into Sagittarius, Mercury's moving in, the sun's moving in under the rulership of a more empowered Jupiter. Jupiter and Pisces, a little bit more imaginative and sensitive and emotionally deep. And I think this will feel like a big breath.
Yeah.
When Venus finally moves into Sag.
I love the early part of this because on the 17th, Mercury also enters Sagittarius. You got the 16th, Venus into Sag, 17th, Mercury into Sag. And then Mercury conjoins Venus on the 21st, just a couple of days later. And what I love about that combination, especially because on November 20th, just the day previous, you also have the sun. Here we go. The sun is also trining Jupiter. So the sun's trining Jupiter at the same time that you get Venus and Mercury together in Jupiter's sign. This feels like a moment that could be very charming and fun and charismatic. Like good for if you're like in sales. Like I could see you could sell your best house or whatever you're trying to, you're trying to sell someone the big house that'll, if you're what do you call it, a real estate agent, like this could get it done. You know what this reminds me of is, you ever see the Indiana Jones movies?
Oh, I love them. Yeah.
Okay, so there we go. We got Star Wars, we've got Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones.
The trifecta, man. We're all set.
That's right. like Mercury and Venus in Sag is like the charm and wit and attractiveness of Indy and like whoever his chick is, and you know what I mean? Like he's always got someone, and he's always got this witty banter going back and forth. I remember, I think it was in the first one, I think her name was Miriam.
Yeah,
she had dark hair. and she was a really strong Sag character in my opinion. And you know, he's a very Sag-like character. Same thing like Han Solo and Princess Leia. You know that like. So I think it's very witty and charming and fun. There's a big quality to this moment, but it's also frothy.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. It's interesting. I never thought Indiana Jones for many reasons, and also because there's the bigness, the traveling, right, kind of all over, you know, hard to pin down sort of thing. And there's also in Sagittarius too. And just speaking as a Sag, there's a lot in Sagittarius, I think, around meaning and what gives me meaning and what gives my life meaning, you know, that Jupiter idea. And there can also be sort of a darkness and a nihilism even in Sag, like it's meaningless. You know, Indiana goes through some tough, darker stuff too. And there's an interesting interplay, I think, in Sag around all of those meaning, meaninglessness. What gives me meaning? Where do I feel like I've sort of lost gas and I need to like refuel in some way?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, if you think about Han Solo, he's a smuggler who's only in it for the money, but then he eventually finds, you know, a reason for being a part of the team, you know.
Right.
And
saves the whole thing, everybody from the Death Star eventually.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true for I mean, other Sagittarius type of characters that come to mind for me would be like James Bond.
Sure.
I'm not a big fan of a lot of the misogyny in James Bond, you know, but I grew up on it as a kid, so it's baked into my archetypal data banks. And James Bond to me is also someone who, like, you don't really know. He's the best agent, couldn't care less in some ways about like the crown. You know what I mean? Like his loyalty to the political establishment is like, I think he just likes being an agent, you know, what I mean?
Exactly.
And I think Indy's similar. He's similar in that, you know, there's always some sense in which he sort of doesn't give a crap. You know what I mean? And especially in the last, or what was the last one called? The Last Crusade.
The Last with Sean Connery. Yeah, The Last Crusade. Yeah.
Funny that there's a Bond character in it with him. Well, in The Last Crusade, he has to, in a sense, make that spiritual leap. Like he takes this big spiritual leap, and of course he has to let go of the temptress woman who wants it for herself, which is terrible. That's another terrible image of the feminine. Like,
I know,
you know, there it is. But I think the point is just that what you're saying is absolutely correct, where there's a lot of this big jovial quality in the air around this part of November. If we go, you know, this is right around the let's say 16th through like the 23rd, because by the 23rd, we're also getting a new moon in Sagittarius. We're coming through a dark moon in Scorpio, where when you have all these Sagittarian planets present, I could see a little bit of an eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die, or who gives a F.
Yeah.
Like in the air. It could be really fun, but there could also be a sense of bottoming out, and maybe trying to like restore meaning or find meaning through that process.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting. I think you know, Sagittarius for me, all the double-bodied signs are always dealing with the tension between two ideas, right? They're always dealing with the sort of, and I think Sagittarius does find that is trying to think of, I'm trying to like kind of localize it from my own experience. There's that sense of it's the darkest time of the year. What are we, does it really matter? Does anything really matter? You know, what is it, you know, that sort of feeling. And then there's oftentimes just in the nick of time, you know, that Jupiter hope comes back and says, this is what matters. This is what's meaningful to you. And, you know, with the dark Scorpio moon coming in, but then coming into Sag, it might be like, oh, okay, this is the moment where I'm starting to restore my faith, so to speak. Yeah. Restore coherence, those sort of Jupiter ideas.
That's right. Yeah, I like that. It's a moment of, even, you know, another thing is that if we've gone through this whole process, especially of trying to like vindicate Venus, if that's a theme at all for the month, and you see this new moon coming through with the Venus-Mercury conjunction in Jupiter's sign. By the way, as Jupiter is stationing to turn direct on the same day of the new moon.
Right.
To me, this represents a turning point in our faith, in our understanding, in what somehow gives coherence, order, meaning to our lives, and it's somehow been earned through the turmoil of the earlier part of the month.
Yeah. Yeah. What might have felt disjointed, right? We were talking about those, like all these sort of instinctual ideas, Venus and Scorpio and the Uranus opposition, the Saturn squares. What might have felt disjointed or like a roller coaster maybe starts to feel like a coherent philosophy or meaning or belief system starts to form around it at this point.
With Venus involved, it feels to me like those early attempts with Saturn are probably not the right ones.
Yeah.
It just feels like the temptation right away with like hit Uranus and then hit Saturn is going to be about the thing that tries to pull us into Saturn too quickly. It's like pull us into order and definition too quickly, make an ideology, etc. Whereas when Venus is involved with the new moon in Jupiter's sign, Jupiter's turning direct in the exaltation of Venus, not far from Neptune, it just feels like this is a much more realized and embodied place that we're coming from by the next new moon.
For sure. And that feels, yes, exactly. And that has like expansiveness and hope, and there's potential for that now, that sort of feeling.
Well, let's go back just a minute, because one transit we sort of scooted over in the midst of it, which I think is also interesting and may also speak to this feeling of trying to find or reclaim a sense of mission or purpose. Well, we also have Mars's retrograde hitting the square to Neptune again, and that is happening on November 19th. What comes to my mind immediately, Alex, and then you tell me what you think, is I'm looking at this and going, I mean, I made a video not long ago on, Mars retrograde hitting Neptune as trying to reclaim youth, reclaim magic, reclaim playfulness, reclaim childlike, imaginative spontaneity. And I talked about those things and reflected on them in light of having gone to Disney World recently with my kids, where I was watching Mars slow down to station in a square with Neptune and sort of going there myself in a way. While also having to distinguish between the magic and the mayhem that is Disney World, So, but I feel like if you look at this, it's like, isn't Mars sort of on the same page? If you think of the youthful spring sign of Gemini, on the cusp of spring in Pisces, and then the emphasis being given to Venus over and over, it's like there's something about the feminine, the aesthetic, the embodied, the intuitive, the playful, that's trying to figure itself out. So I think about this as adding to that theme of trying to give Venus a coherent place. Like, no, Venus, you're not just the temptation to eat and watch Netflix at the end of a hard day of work, and when I should just go to bed early. You're something that needs to be right in the start of every day, in the middle of every day, and at the end of every day, along with everything else. I think Mars is trying to get us there too, but its agenda has more to do with perception and like the mind and its relationship to like spontaneity and play and things like that. Anyway, I'm rambling. What do you think about this one?
No, I'm actually just kind of processing. I never considered it from that point of view before. And I think that it actually, there can be a sense, I think, sometimes where and maybe I'm going a lot off course here, but track me here and see what you think. Like where the serious goodness gets too much. I'm trying too hard to be right and to do good and to follow all these things and to track all these things and to do my journaling and eat my kale and do all the things, all the self-care I need to do, do my yoga, whatever, and I missed it, whatever. And there's a little bit with like Mars and Gemini. It reminds us of like, and my little cousins were how they would just be talking. And then, like you've probably seen your kids, they're just off doing something else. They're just like, they're not concerned with whether this was the right, they just go off and do something because it's fun and it's brought out in some way. And it's instinctual, but not in that sort of emotional way from Scorpio, but more in the like air sign intellect of Gemini, right? Where it's just like, oh, I think that idea sounds good. I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to try that.
Right.
And there's imagination, and Neptune fueling the imagination too with that,
yes.
the broader sense of that.
That's right. And doesn't that, to me, that plays into like this flavor of Mars retrograde with Neptune feels a little bit more like, it feels more in tune with Venus than Mars usually would.
Yeah.
Because there's something inherently more playful about it. And to me, when you get a more playful Mars and then you get, Venus in a fire sign, I think that, and they're opposed to one another by whole sign, but it feels to me like that opposition is probably more like chemistry, the cooking of tension and chemistry, like the tango, than it
Right.
is an indication of like some big conflict that's coming, say between the masculine and feminine. I feel like this one, because of Neptune, because Mercury's sign tends to be very playful, I just feel like the two of them are, it's like we're trying to figure out how to do like how to assert some new part of ourselves, but in a way that's fundamentally more spontaneous, playful, and Venusian.
Yeah, where you're just, yeah, exactly. And that you're letting yourself in a healthy way fly by the seat of your pants a little bit and just kind of fall, and that I think is actually really necessary. And I speak as a Buddhist who can get very middle road focused, right? Like that's
Right.
out of balance. That's out of balance. You're like, well, what the hell? It's not harming anybody. It's not harming me. Like, like, why don't I try this? There's that actually, I think, kind of even ties back to some of the Uranus oppositions that are happening early in the month. A little bit of like, I might as well try it. Might as well try it.
The archetype that comes to my mind, Alex, is the magician card in tarot. And
Yeah.
I mentioned this in the talk that I gave on Mars and Neptune, which is just that the magician is experimental. We've got Mars in Hermes sign, retrograding, just like a very Hermes-like thing to do, with Neptune, this like nebulous otherworldly thing. And of course, Neptune and Jupiter are back together. They're in sign of Venus's exaltation. Venus is opposing. I get the more, like I was mentioning, those tensions between, Indiana Jones and the Miriam in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or whatever, those like on-screen tensions, like Princess Leia and Han Solo. That's the kind of tension that I feel in the air. I feel it's very playful and dynamic. And I there are some moments where I think it could get more intense, and we're actually going to go there next. But I feel like right around the new moon, this energy to me is it's about trying to make room for something playful and Venusian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's go to now at the end of the month, we get into Mercury opposite Mars. And so you can see, here it is. So it's right around November 29th into the 30th that Mercury will go through the opposition to Mars. Excuse me. And then if we're going forward just a little bit into December, then we can see, right about December, it's November 30th into December 1st that Venus follows suit and opposes Mars. Mm-hmm. So you've got the Venus, Mercury, Mars opposition to sort of end the month of November. Now, of course, we're at the first quarter moon around the same time, and a lot of Jupiter energy in the air, with the moon in Jupiter's sign at first quarter, sun in Jupiter's sign, Mercury. So there's a ton of Jupiter in the air. To me, again, I would then look at this as more of the kind of chemistry that leads to lovemaking, or like creative, the tension of the opposites that leads to a third, some creative result that comes from a tension. I would look at it like that much more than I would like some big throwdown between these planets. But I think there are some tensions here too. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the moon actually is quite significant there, especially this conjunct Neptune which is ostensibly still squaring this whole configuration. There's something about the oppositions creating a little bit of I'm trying to think of where the desire to separate, or the desire, like, I'm done with this, or you said that, this communication that wants to separate, that wants to, with Mercury and Mars involved. But there's almost like this cloak of Jupiter and Venus that are unifying principles, and even the moon, which to me is a unifying principle, that wants to bring things back together. It's like, I know we're getting into a fight, but it's like the fight that like leads to sex afterwards in a way
Yeah,
like that.
that's exactly
Like
what I was thinking too.
we're really fighting, but are we just needing to release tension, or like, you know,
Yes.
have a cathartic release of tension or something like that?
It's like going to a game. I like going to professional sports games.
Yeah,
Some games are so much fun that even if your team loses, if it's the middle of the season and they've got 80 games to play and it was
right,
a close game, but they lost and you had a ton of fun, it doesn't matter that they lost.
right.
You know, and I feel like, I mean, maybe for some diehard fans who decide to throw their TVs out the window no matter what, then they'll be pissed, you know, but like I like having fun at sporting events. So to me, this would be the kind of thing where it's like, you know what? I'm happy to lose. That was fun.
Right.
There's still a playfulness in the air where now, okay, on the other hand, I could also see this being a space where people are getting, if remember, we run the risk throughout this whole month of November of, on behalf of Venus, let me get ideologically rigid again.
Right.
So if that's been the case, and we got, you know, a lot of Venus being supported by Jupiter, which could form dogma around Venus just as much as Venus squaring Saturn after hitting Uranus could form dogma around Venus. So if that's been the case and we hit this moment, then I do think it could be a moment of ideological conflict, that this thing that we've tried to form is now being tested, and it is being tested by Mars in the trickster's sign. And so
Yeah.
you're going to have a formidable opponent in a Mars retrograde in Gemini coming at you. You know, if you are Venus and Mercury locked down in your new sense of certainty that allows you to justify whatever Venus has been up to, you know, and maybe it's been something that hasn't been good. Maybe it's something that hasn't needed any explanation or dogma behind it, you know, but you've done
Right.
that. And then all of a sudden now it's like, well, now it's going to be tested, and you're going to maybe have to realize that, like, I've gone and tried to put Venus in a box all over again. And I think Mars could actually like push that button.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, you know, it's interesting. I was thinking of these two ways it could go. There's also an erotic there. I'm trying to think of, I can't think of her name. In one of the first Sherlock Holmes stories, there's the woman that he's trying to get something. I think it's the King of Bohemia. He's trying to get something back from her, and she winds up being way smarter than him. She evades him. I think she's one of the only people who actually evades Sherlock Holmes and what he wants to do. And he's deeply attracted to it. Like it's the only time you ever really see that side of his character, but it's from an adversarial relationship. He's trying, you know, there's a matching of wits, so to speak, that he's deeply drawn to because she's really challenging him and is, you know, one of the only opponents that actually beats him at his own game. So there's that. And there could be then also the devolvement into, especially with Mercury, I think, is Sagittarius. I'm speaking with natal placement here. Sort of just speaking without having your facts straight, you know, trying to just conflict with just off the top of your head. I saw this, or I heard this, or making something totally up. You know, I know one thing I've had to learn how to do in my life is not talk out of my ass. And that's been my Mercury and Sag, you know, that sort of idea.
Right. It's like you're not you, but one is trying to win the argument through wit and charm rather than accurate like facts or something. Like on a debate team, this would be, you know, look, the judges aren't going to grade your personality very much here. You know, like they're gonna you're gonna look at the arguments that you made and how convincing and compelling were they. So this could be where if you have been relying on that charisma to sell the house, suddenly the question about the foundation is going to come up. You know, suddenly that kind of thing. And that's I'm extrapolating from what you just said anyway, if I've got that right.
Yeah, exactly. The inspector comes, and then you got to actually see what's going on in the house.
Yeah. Now, to me, what's really interesting about this, for example, is that you know, you could be returning to old conflicts or debates too. You could be going back in time to revisit things that have been debated or argued about in the past, or claims that were made that are now being challenged, or something like that. And I think the message I'm going to take for myself around this time is, if something like that comes up, have fun. You know, like can't you do this in a way that's fun? You can't lose something that you're willing to give away really quickly in a debate. So, for example, if someone comes at, right now, for example, in the astrological world, people are starting to debate once again whether whole sign houses are the oldest form of house division or not.
Right.
Okay. So, for example, when people nowadays approach me and say, well, is that true? Well, by everything I've understood, it is. But also, let me tell you that I don't care if it isn't. Like, if you start off that way, it's really hard for the space of the debate to be like, you've just taken away that anything can be really at stake. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. It's one thing I think Sag takes a lot of heat for sometimes is bluntness and just being just straight up. And sometimes that's one of the best ways to walk in disagreement, being like, yeah, I concede that. Or I can see that point. Yeah. Okay. And what? Like, let's talk about something else. I think it's that's a quality that can be very helpful when wielded correctly in Sagittarius.
Yeah. It's such a good point. I was just thinking about that, Alex. I was like, I was talking to another astrologer friend of mine and was saying, like, one of the criticisms that was being made of the whole sign house sort of movement was that, like, well, at Project Hindsight, where the first real proponents of whole sign houses as the oldest form of house division was sort of coming about, a lot of them were like they were very absolutist in their thinking, and my response to that is, yeah, they were. It doesn't mean they were wrong about everything either, and it's that kind of, I feel like that with Venus in the mix, it's like, take away the idea that your ego is at stake and think instead about whoever or whatever you're getting involved in some debate with, as like, can I make this into a harmonious, fun experience, right?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Can this be playful?
And can it stimulate, creativity and thought and new ideas? And, that's you take into Jupiter's sign too, a new creation or a boundless hope or something like that, where I think, sometimes debate, a healthy adversarial relationship can be really creative and fun and spark all sorts of interesting different types of ideas that can come out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, I'm sidetracked on that because I've been thinking about that all day today and talking about it with a friend. But Alex, we've made it through the month of November. I'd love to hear, well, why don't we each give like a 60-second summarization of what we can expect from this month. You just give me yours, and then I'll try to come up with one too.
So I'm going to give, and try not to make it too heady, a musical example here. I've been thinking of this month very much like a symphony by Gustav Mahler. And these symphonies often, especially his early symphonies, began with a lot of wrestling with deeper, darker motifs and a crystallization of what, his relationship to darker emotions and darker places within himself. But they end with this almost exuberant, exaggeratedly triumphant finale where there's just this amazing amount of hope that comes out of it. So I'm kind of thinking, I always think of charts and sound and music. I'm thinking of it as sort of like there's some stuff to wrestle with. There's some stuff to discover. There may be stuff that comes to light that you had no idea was there. But that if you can, in the last half of the month, find the sort of path towards the triumphant finale, that the Archer of Sagittarius, kind of looking out into the future, that sort of idea, that it can be the source of a lot of new creativity and fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
That was really nice. And for someone who knows nothing about classical music, I followed that. I was cool. Able to like understand. Yeah. So let me think about this. Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna go for the I'm gonna go back to Star Wars and Indiana Jones.
Nice.
I'm going to say that it's a very adventurous month, but the main character is Venus, and she's going on an adventure. Mm-hmm. I feel like she has to liberate herself from caring too much about what other people think, false dichotomies about the feminine. And this could be for a man, a woman, however anyone identifies. We're just talking about that feminine anima yin quality in us. It's not just good woman, bad woman, or good yin, bad yin. There's something else. There's like a third or fourth or fifth possibility that we are carving out for Venus right now. And I think that this is the adventure where Venus gets to go from dealing with like being the smuggler, you know, or being the nihilistic problem to, you know, discovering her own transcendent part of a story, and a soulful, meaningful part of the story that also goes beyond the good Venus, bad Venus distinction. And that then as the month goes on, we're going to be starting to the temptation to like concretize a philosophy again, so that this Venus, and we have to like somehow resist that and just let Venus flow along and have fun. And if we've tried to pin down this new Venus too much, the trickster will challenge us at the end of the month. So I almost feel like this is like a rather than Indiana Jones or like Han Solo, I feel like this is like Princess Leia as the protagonist, you know, or Miriam from the first Indiana Jones, like she's the protagonist. Like I just feel like it's Venus's adventure this month.
Oh, I love that. I just had in my head with Princess Leia was that moment of liberation where she, you know, in The Empire Strikes Back, she goes, "I love you." You know, she just screams it at him. I know. Which is in any
You know, by the way, did you know that moment was not scripted?
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just he just said that.
Han Solo wouldn't say "I love you" back, you know?
Right. Right. That was, that's great. So I'm really looking forward to this. And I'm eager to hear what people have to say. So you guys know what to do. Please use the hashtag grabbed or email us grabbed@nightlightastrology.com for any stories that you have about any of the transits this month. We'd love to collect those into a future storytelling episode. Don't forget that you can also sign up for my new course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, starts on November 12th. That is very soon. So you have just a little bit of time to sign up. If you want to find Alex's work, he is at Alex Amorosi Healing on Instagram, and he would love to book a reading with you. You know, put you on his schedule so he can read your chart for you and tell you about the transits and how they're going to be affecting you. Any other thing you want to shout out, Alex?
No, you know, thanks so much for the mention. I'll just reciprocate by saying Adam's class was one of the best things that I've ever done for myself in my astrological career. And it really, that's why I feel so confident in my practice and my ability to keep learning in astrology today. So I just want to put that back to you because it really had a huge effect on me.
Thanks, man. That's great. Yeah, that's a great compliment. I appreciate that. Well, anyway, you guys have a great day. Have a great month of November, and we will see you again next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.